Well, friends, welcome to this special presentation this afternoon by Miguel Gil. And before we get started, Elham is going to offer a devotion.
Oh Dios, guíame. Oh Dios, protégeme. Ilumina la lámpara de mi corazón y haz de mí una estrella brillante. Tú eres el fuerte y el poderoso. Tú eres el fuerte y el poderoso.
Thank you very much, Elham, and greetings, friends. Thanks for joining us for this special presentation. Here on the Gold Coast, a group of us have been meeting through this special year, the centenary of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. And our hostess has been Jan Flower. We're in her house, and on another screen, I'm showing Jan here. She can give a wave and say hello to the friends who are joining us here. And our convener, Farhan Dr. Kavari, is also going to wave and say hi.
Hi, everyone.
So it's Farhan's idea to do this. And it's part of our series. We invited Miguel to speak to us, and because it's going to be on Zoom, it was a chance to have him speak not just to our small group here, but to invite our friends so that we can make the most of this presentation. So many of you may know of Miguel and others don't. So I'll just give a very quick overview. He is born and raised in Spain, but he completed his studies in Australia some decades ago. And he completed a master's in modern European studies at Monash University and a postgraduate diploma in translation studies from Victoria College. And then in 2011, a PhD from Monash University. And that PhD was looking at the Baha'i conception of peace, and thus this strong interest in secret of divine civilization. Miguel has done a tremendous amount of work in translation. He has worked for a number of years as a retention, transition, and first-year experience coordinator at Edith Cowan University in Perth, and then at Victoria University in Melbourne. And he's translated a great number of books between Persian, Spanish, and English. He's currently completing, he's been saying this for some time, currently completing a comprehensive thematic bilingual dictionary between Spanish and Persian with more than 20,000 words. I think it must be nearly finished, Miguel, so you can tell us about that as well. So he's a linguist, he's a historian, he's a scholar. He's ably supported in all this by Elham, who has a shelf of books behind her camera today, as well as Miguel's. And they're old friends of myself and Kathy from Melbourne days, and we've stayed in touch as much as possible. So welcome, Miguel, to this special presentation today. I'm going to hand over to you now, and you can give us your PowerPoint, give us your presentation. We look forward to your presentation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for those lovely words of you, Graham. And I know Graham and Kathy from a long time ago, and I always felt envious of the amount of work that Graham was able to do thanks to his good connections and good offices at different universities. Our paths unfortunately had to part, and because of that, well, we didn't have the opportunity to keep in contact as much as I think both we would have loved. But anyway, my debt of gratitude to Graham and Kathy is immense. And the good thing is it is in more ways than one. There are many good examples that Graham set in terms of Baha'i scholarship in Australia. And wherever he went, he took that sort of passion with him. Same with Kathy. And because of that, I think Australia has been extremely lucky to have both of them cultivating Baha'i studies. Anyway, this is my own thanks to the thanks given by Graham. And regarding my presentation, it is just what it says, a few glimpses about Abdu'l-Baha's work. First, let us remember that Abdu'l-Baha was born on the 23rd of March, 1844, and the place of his birth was Tehran, probably one of those two houses where the place where he was born. And probably you remember having read somewhere that the first house that Baha'u'llah inhabited in Tehran was in fact part of a complex of 6 buildings that Mirza Bozorg, Baha'u'llah's father, bought. So it's not that easy to establish exactly what is what. But importantly for me, this thing about the house of Baha'u'llah in Tehran is important because I always wanted to have an idea of where he was located in time and space, and to get a close feel that now, luckily, we can more or less reproduce because we are living historical times and we have access to that sort of information. The population of Tehran at the time of Abdu'l-Baha's birth was probably no more than 56,000 inhabitants. And the place was divided into 4 major living quarters. So all in all, it was a very small place. Even if it was quite a spread, it was a small place where everyone was probably able to know absolutely everyone. More so if you belong, obviously, to the elite of society, as was the case with Baha'u'llah. In this picture, this map, you can see represented Tehran with the surrounding walls, and in red there is that's more or less the area where those buildings I was referring to, the house of Baha'u'llah, was located. And this circle in blue actually represents the main place, the palaces of residence of the Shah. So if you make a little bit of a beeline, you see that it was probably no more than 2 kilometers from where he was born to the very seat of power in the whole of Iran, all very much within walking distance. And of course, this is important. You can see more or less how these things sit now in modern times with a Google map. And you can also see more or less with these superimposed images, some important places related to the history of the faith, like the mausoleum of Sultan Abdulazim, which is located in Ray, and Ray is now part of really Tehran. But at the time, it was still fairly separated and disconnected from Tehran. And actually, Ray was the old Safavid capital of Iran for a while, if my memory serves me well. The thing is, you can see also other important buildings that are connected with the history of the faith, located some places. And the reason for actually having this image here is just to give a little bit of an impression of how things would look to Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. Obviously, many things have changed even in these more historical settings. And the same goes for the gate of Shimirán, which is the gate that was very close to actually the house of Baha'u'llah. Those gates are in typical Qajar style, and most of them, I believe, except for one maybe, were demolished during the time of Reza Shah, I think, the 1930s or around, and in order to make room for Greater Tehran. And it is a pity because it means that some of these extremely beautiful places have been lost. Again, an image of where the house of Baha'u'llah more or less would be located, and the connection with the Jewish quarter. It was very close by. And then you have the Golestan Palace over there, which is the city of power, etc. You can see that today, between the Golestan Palace and the bank of the National Bank, there is just a very scarce short distance. And for the same reason, I just wanted to share this imagery. You can see the Golestan Palace, the gardens, and in blue, you can see now identify the Taqiyya, which is this beautiful building that was erected by Nasiruddin Shah. And that was where religious representations would take place. For us as Baha'is, obviously, the place has also great significance because very close to that demolished entrance to the Taqiyya was located the Black Pit. And well, it's an interesting thing that the Black Pit was able to survive as a dungeon that it was, whereas the Taqiyya was completely demolished. Other places that I think Michael Day was interested to see, like Shah Abdullah's Shrine, etc. And in this picture, you can also see another Black Pit, another Siad-Chal. Siad-Chals were in reality prison cells, where all kinds of criminals would be placed. But as in this case, you can see the people behind that barred door are debtors, people who were in debt, and because they didn't pay, they had to go to prison. In the 19th century, more or less, this was abolished in most countries in Europe, but still in other parts of the world, including in this case, I think it is Tajikistan, you can see that people had to pay their dues by just being confined between bars. This picture is a deluxe, actually, Siad-Chal. If you compare with Baha'u'llah's Siad-Chal, as we know from his own description, because at least there is some sunlight there, and probably people could still have a conversation with with people from outside, etc. And we know that those were not the conditions for Baha'u'llah. So this is just by way of minimalist introduction to the figure of Abdu'l-Baha. When Abdu'l-Baha was in the Shi'a to visit his father, and we know that Baha'u'llah prevented that from happening initially. He was barely 9 years old. So just imagine how difficult the experience and traumatic in so many ways must have been for Abdu'l-Baha. And the same goes for other similar experiences that were life-changing for Abdu'l-Baha, like when just a few years later, actually, Baha'u'llah moved to Sulaymaniyah, and for a couple of years, Abdu'l-Baha and his family were devoid of the presence of Baha'u'llah. Anyway, The Secret of Divine Civilization is the first book as such that was produced by Abdu'l-Baha at a very early age. It was written in 1875, so he was barely 30 years old when he penned this masterpiece. In this picture, you can see the Verlag edition of the Secret of Divine Civilization, together with the Risalah CSE and treatise on politics. And as we know, the first translation of the Secret of Divine Civilization into English was the work of Johanna Dawood, and obviously it was a first, and in that sense made accessible contents, but the translation was not that good. So we had to wait still some 30 more years to get the translation made by Marcia Gale, together with collaboration of his father, who had already worked on into the translation of The Secret of Divine Civilization. So what you see there is just a couple of the initial introduction. And if you look at it, you can see that there is quite a difference in the style, the flavor, and the potency of the translation. And that goes also to reflect the original much better. In terms of studies about The Secret of Divine Civilization, there is a full Encyclopedia Iranic article by Magdalene Sen. It is quite scholarly. And then there is this piece of work by Sayyidi Nader Sayyidi, the Risalah Madaniyeh, The Secret of Divine Civilization and the Problem of Modernization in the Middle East. It is a tiny volume, but it is quite packed with interesting insights from Nader Sayyidi. Interestingly, this translation was superseded by translation back into English, which was thoroughly modified. I had actually translated the initial booklet of Nader Sayyidi into Spanish, from Persian into Spanish, when I approached the author, and Nader told me, oh, by the way, I'm sorry to say, but there is another version of this, which is in English, and it is far preferable because it is more up to date and so on and so forth. So with Nader's, I think I have to do always twice the same amount of work to get it right, because even that book I had to buy another copy because I lost it for a while and I couldn't really bear myself parting with the book. So now I have two different versions of this thing. Anyway, I did translate again Nader Sayedi's book into Spanish. This is a glimpse and article in the Iranica Encyclopedia. And of course, there are study guides and outlines about the secret of divine civilization that are quite informative, etc. So probably nothing new for you, but good to keep track of what's available. Now, in terms of the importance and significance of the secret of divine civilization for us Baha'is now and then, you can say that it's a little bit like the Kitab-e-Igan of Abdu'l-Baha. It is a book that contains much about Iran, but transcends Iran. In terms of its significance, this quote from Abdu'l-Baha is interesting. As to the epistles, the mysterious forces of civilization and the traveler's narrative, verily they are the important epistles which vivify and civilize the souls and educate them with the best virtues and the best of politics. Therefore, attach ye to them great importance. And ye, O ye who are noble, not waste your time in discussions that are useless and from which no benefit can be obtained. It is incumbent upon ye to elevate the word of God and to spread the fragrances of God. And this is from Star of the West, volume 10. And from Shoghi Effendi, we have this important, very short statement. The secret of divine civilization, Abdu'l-Baha's outstanding contribution to the future reorganization of the world. And well, to me, it's a little bit of a sort of mystery how a book that essentially addresses a question located in Iran at the time of, Abdu'l-Baha can be read under this different light, which is an outstanding contribution to the future reorganization of the world. This obviously has some connection with what Abdu'l-Baha has to say before about the significance of those two pieces of work. But it is interesting to just keep it in mind. In order to get a copy of the Persian text, you can always go to the Baha'i library, and there you are. You can have always access to that. So when considering the relevance of the secret of divine civilization, we can always try to look at what Iranian authors have been saying for quite a while, since the constitutional revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. The issue of modernization has been absolutely fundamental in terms of how to think and rethink the reality, the social and political, cultural realities of Iran. And you can see and say that actually this coming to grips with what modernity is for Iran is an essential question. So much so that there are scores of books that are and dissertations that are being written almost every single year on the subject. I have a few of them. This is just a tiny representation of what this kind of thinking looks like from the point of view of modern Iranian scholars. This is from a dissertation. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 demonstrated one of the most fundamental problems of the project of modernity in Iran, an absence of a conscious and radical secular opposition to the traditional political thought in modern Iran. In the last 100 years, the political and the intellectual life in Iran has been predominantly occupied with two struggles. One, against the despotism of the monarchy, and second, against the religious power of the ulama in the state. The defeat of the secular opposition, the constitutional monarchist, the communist, and the secular Islamic modernist led to the establishment of an Islamic Republic in Iran in 1979. This defeat demonstrated the historical weakness and incapability of the secular oppositions to establish a secular based on a complete separation of religion and state. And you can probably disagree with the roundness, I mean, the forcefulness with which the author states his position here with regards to the core issue. This is actually the first statement about what his dissertation is all about, but it is characteristic of how many Iranian authors see their history. I mean, the more modern contemporary history of Iran. Whether this diagnosis is true or not is beyond the point. For me, the key point here to remember is how important this issue of coming to grips with modernity is for people to understand what went missing for the past 100 or 200 years in Iran. And in a way, it is quite representative. As I said, there are many other statements along those lines. Now, if we go back to Nader Saidi's book, there is an interesting quote on page 4 that reads, as it reads in Persian, and the translation is more or less like this: "O most great branch, it would be meritorious to write a few pages about the causes of the upliftment of the world or the lack thereof, so that the prejudice may somewhat relent and profit from the tree of utterance that has been raised today," which is a reference to Baha'u'llah. Those are the words of Baha'u'llah addressed to Abdu'l-Baha, actually indicating the need for this work to be written. So these are the instructions, this is the brief, and this is the reason why Abdu'l-Baha actually penned The Secret of Divine Civilization. It would be meritorious to write a few pages about the causes of the upliftment of the world or the lack thereof, so that the prejudiced fanatics, you could also translate, may somewhat relent and profit from the tree of utterance that has been raised today. It's worded in such a way that you would say, well, if that's a brief, what's going to be the outcome of such charge? And well, we know that that's the secret of divine civilization. It is interesting to realize, first of all, that there has been very, very little in terms of references in the literature, the scholarly literature, to The Secret of Divine Civilization by Iranian authors or by, in general, Western scholars. Very, very little. You have to wait till the 1990s to get a few of those from Baha'i scholars, not so much from the rest. In Monica Ringa, in this book, Education, Religion, and the Discourse of Cultural Reform, actually refers to The Secret of Divine Civilization, but she doesn't identify actually the book with Abdu'l-Baha. And the reason is because she was actually quoting the original printed edition, which was in the Library of the Parliament in Tehran. And as we know, that first edition was anonymous. So her way of actually summarizing the content is quite descriptive, factual, but it's no more than one paragraph, and it misses all the many other elements that would have enriched her own analysis, actually, but also the conversation about the significance of the book in terms of the times. The same goes for, well, not the same. It's actually a little bit more mystifying, because Mangal Bayat, in her book, Mysticism and Dissent, has no reference whatsoever to the book of Abdu'l-Baha. And this is more glaring, an absence, because she refers to all the Azalis at the time and their production. So it's not that probably she was not aware of the existence of this book at all. And well, that goes a little bit to show that, as Ismail Velasco would say, there is a sort of blind spot in terms of scholarship. And for a long, long while, it has been probably, how to put it, not all right or not politically correct to actually go into the study of Baha'i books in general, and particular The Secret of Divine Civilization, etc., because there is it's difficult to place in the context of time with current categories. So anyway, there are obviously other reasons, but I'm not going to get into those. The Secret of Divine Civilization provides a clear basis and rationale for the formation of a secular, religiously minded intelligentsia, Roshan Fakane Dini Mazhabi. If we read the book, we realize that one of the things that Abdu'l-Baha does in that book is actually to redefine scholarship in a way that is far more wider than just traditional religious scholarship, the way that was understood by the ulama and the religious Iranians in the 19th century. This broader concept of intelligentsia or intellectual work, if you want, is something that does not require from you to actually move into a madrasa and to the Jose and all the theological studies. It is far broader than that. Abdu'l-Baha established in that book the rationale for that wider concept of intellectual work. Also, it is important because it establishes how Baha'i discourse may operate. First of all, it establishes two fundamental texts that define the Baha'i approach to peace, which for my own research was quite important. And that's pages 64, 66, and 70 and 71. And also, it creates a general framework of values and ethical guidelines on which substantive progress can be made towards overcoming prejudices and man-made barriers, which is one of the key elements in that brief given to Abdu'l-Baha by Baha'u'llah. In terms of the first text I was referring to about peace, it is very well known. What is not so well known is that this is in reality like a first for for Baha'is because it predates a very similar text declaration by Baha'u'llah. And in the way it summarizes the key ingredients, safeguards, and standards that should inform that concept of collective security, this paragraph is extremely valuable. It is hard to imagine how something like this, powerfully written or expressed in Persian, would have been read by his contemporaries in Iran. But it must have been quite interesting and powerful, a paragraph. We are familiar with the concept of collective security, what's the duty of the potentates and the kings and rulers of the world were charged to do in order to preserve peace and justice within the kingdoms, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go through that particular text, but it is foundational for us as Baha'is, because usually when we refer to the Baha'i concept of peace, we start by talking sometimes more about this particular paragraph and the elements of collective security that are there. But there is a second paragraph, as I mentioned before, that has been less quoted, but also is interesting, because in a way it's not in contradiction, but with a nuance, if you want, compared to the previous one. It says, a conquest can be a praiseworthy thing, and there are times when war becomes the powerful basis of peace and ruin the very means of reconstruction. If, for example, a high-minded sovereign marshals his troops to block the onset of the insurgent and the aggressor, or again, if he takes the field and distinguishes himself in a struggle to unify a divided state and people, if, in brief, he is waging war for a righteous purpose, then this seeming wrath is mercy itself, and this apparent tyranny the very substance of justice, and this warfare the cornerstone of peace. Today, the task befitting great rulers is to establish universal peace, for in this lies the freedom of all peoples. Now, if we read that paragraph and reread, there is always the possibility of thinking, well, in that case, what happens to the concept of collective security if, after all, you're going to still have these wars of expansion or conquest, etc. Well, first of all, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that this comes second in the book, and in reality contains a sort of cross-reference to the previous paragraph. Today, the task befitting great rulers is to establish universal peace, for in this lies the freedom of all peoples. And the contents of that universal peace, the requirements are already set up by Abdu'l-Baha. So Abdu'l-Baha doesn't deny that there could be circumstances where maybe there is use of force that can be more or less justified because of these alleged reasons. And let us remind ourselves of the fact that when The Secret of Divine Civilization was written in 1875, already the world has been transformed in many ways, and Western world in particular had been subjected to an incredible vortex of changes. Germany was reunified. Italy, through the use of force, actually, was also reunified. And the United States have gone, of course, through this incredible civil war and so on and so forth. So where instances where you could more or less see at play these constructive forces, if you want, of war, just war even, you could say. But anyway, the important point to remember here is just this last reference, I think, of Abdu'l-Baha to the fact that the task befitting great rulers is to establish universal peace, for in this lies the freedom of all peoples. Now, let us jump a little bit in time. Remember, Abdu'l-Baha, some 35 years later, after producing The Secret of Divine Civilization, was on the move to New York on board of the Cedric. He was listed as an author in the Manifest of Alien Passengers. And I was curious to see who else was on that ship. And you can see that there is a guy, number 4, Fiore, Professor Pasquale, who is listed as a senator from Italy. And he was visiting the United States because he wanted to attend the meeting of the American Society of International Law in April 1912, where he was to deliver an address entitled Some Considerations on the Past, Present, and Future of International Law. This society had been created in 1906, and it was pioneering in terms of work in this particular area of international law. There is even a connection with the Baha'i faith because Elihu Root was the president of this society. He had this wonderful thing to say about war can be outlawed only by arraying the moral force of the civilized world in support of definite rules of conduct, which exclude war, and by giving to that moral force institutions to which that force may be applied of the specific cases of attempted violation. One of those necessary institutions is a court by whose judgment the great multitude who desire the peace of justice may know what is just. This was written in 1923, but Elihu Root was the uncle of Martha Root. And Martha Root actually used sometimes the good name of Elihu Root to open further doors for her incredible services. Now, the reason why I'm again making reference to this is because it gives you also an insight into the purpose of Abdu'l-Baha's visit to the United States, which, as we know, as he himself declared, was to further the cause of peace. This was very much part of the spirit of the time in America in particular, and this particular Society of American International Law Society was an important element. The press always made references to Abdu'l-Baha as an apostle of peace, Baha'is leader here to help world peace, etc. Fortunately, now we have these 2 thick books by Amin Echea about the repercussions and different echoes and reverberations that his presence had in the United States and the Western world in general. And it is only now, I think, that really we start to gather such massive information that is almost overwhelming, because you realize yeah, it is true what Valiuzi was saying. Shoghi Effendi was saying about the significance of the visit and how it was received at the time. Every single act made by Abdu'l-Baha had this divine aspect to it and significance. So it's no wonder that many people reacted the way they did to his presence. In the promulgation of universal peace, there is this very interesting quote, which says, "What human powers and forces have been employed in the prosecution of war and applied to inhuman purposes of battle and bloodshed. In this most radiant century, it has become necessary to divert these energies and utilize them in other directions, to seek the new path of fellowship and unity, to unlearn the science of war and devote supreme human forces to the blessed arts of peace. After long trial and experience, we are convinced of the harmful and satanic outcomes of the dissension. Now we must seek after means by which the benefits of agreements and concord may be enjoyed. When such means are found, we must give them a trial." And of course, we know that this is a familiar theme in Abdu'l-Baha's talks and allocutions in the Western world. But this basic idea of unlearning the science of war is one that I would like to stress, because there is a great deal of unlearning that requires learning that we need to do. And the more emphasis we do on this, and obviously on the positive side of the equation, the better. But it is not that easy to actually come to grips with what this unlearning involves. And I would say that some basic premises of how life in our modern world is sustained and nurtured is something that we need to question and to go back to the very essentials. And it is only then that Baha'i principles, as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, make fuller sense. And it is only then that we realize that by establishing those very basic principles of harmony, unity, peace, reciprocity, etc., that we are in a position to actually build the defenses for a future world civilization. This requires calling into question, for instance, some of those received truths. At the time of Abdu'l-Baha, as we know, Darwinism, social Darwinism was not even at its height, but it was very powerful. And it was quite normal for people to think that societies, modern nations, had a right to inflict damage and to impose their own will simply because they had a sort of divine mandate and they were superior in many ways. Abdu'l-Baha simply debunked this kind of myths at the time. So it's no wonder that some people didn't have receiving ear to accept that sort of novel truth. But it is us, our obligation is to go back to those very essentials and try to disentangle what this means for our current world. And I would say this is one of the meanings of Baha'i discourse to me. Now, an interesting point. Robert Stockman in this book, Abdu'l-Baha in America, actually, Graham told me once, well, there is this book by Robert Stockman. I didn't know that it was there. It fell off my radar. So it was interesting reading. There is an interesting paragraph there about the way Abdu'l-Baha framed his own speeches. He says in a very inconspicuous manner, the talks by Abdu'l-Baha epitomizes a common pattern in his addresses to the public or to a mixed Baha'i and non-Baha'i audience. Start with a simple observation, an event in the newspapers, an introductory remark, even the weather, then followed by a transition to a spiritual principle, relate that principle to Jesus and the Bible, and then reconnect the subject to Baha'u'llah and close with an exhortation for his audience to internalize the principle and express it in their lives, thereby bringing the audience from the commonplace to Baha'u'llah and to a spiritual principle via their Christian heritage. And this is, in reality, I think, a very good encapsulation of what elevated conversations are all about. This ability to suddenly remove ourselves from everyday life and then see the more profound aspects of, or the higher aspects of those realities. Abdu'l-Baha had this gift, obviously, to immediately see that kind of common ground and to allow the person to actually see for themselves how that was also their vantage point. Now, we know that Abdu'l-Baha was invited by the Lake Mohon Conference to address them. In principle, this was the main reason for Abdu'l-Baha to go publicly there. Of course, there was the other reason, which was more or less united Baha'i community in North America had been pleading, and Abdu'l-Baha finally was responsive to that call. Lake Mohon is this idyllic place which was built with that purpose in mind of cultivating spaces for peace, international peace. It was a big thing at the time. The founders were the Smiley brothers. You can see one of them. And this is the rug that Abdu'l-Baha gave to the Smiley people as a way of returning the favor. And even today, you can see the rug being displayed in a position of honor at that particular place, which is so beautiful to see. There were many important receptions in honor of Abdu'l-Baha with thousands of people, as in this particular case in New York City in November 1912, and always peace, harmony, international harmony were key aspects. Now, I just want to give you an insight into how Abdu'l-Baha approached these kind of conversations with prominent people. This particular one took place on April the 15th, April the 15th, 1912. Hudson Maxim was the inventor of explosives. His brother actually was the inventor of the Maxim machine gun. In 1905, Abdu'l-Baha had a good number of Westerners visiting, and from the diary of Mirza Mahmud, we also learn about a similar kind of encounter where Abdu'l-Baha was being, in a way, being tested about what you have to say regarding these matters. Now, these two particular instances are very interesting because they show how Abdu'l-Baha approached people who had, in principle, very little in common with his own approach. So we can learn a little bit in practice how this went about. By the way, Hudson Maxim was the author of this book, Defenseless America. He was pushing for the creation of a big navy. At the time, there was very little of a navy in the United States. And you can see that he had no qualms about saying the quick firing gun is the greatest life-saving instrument ever invented. That quote in itself is very revealing of the psychology, not only of the man, but also of a great number of men of statement and captains of enterprise. So what I want to show is the dialogue that took place between Abdu'l-Baha and Hudson Maxim on that very day. And for that, I will have to show, sorry, another screen. Which is like this. And for this, I think I need a couple of people who volunteered to actually read it. Abdu'l-Baha said, we will have to repeat Abdu'l-Baha said, and then Hudson Maxim replied, etc. So if we do that, there is no impersonation of the voice of Abdu'l-Baha. It is just reading what the testimonial is. And I would like you to pay special attention to the progression, the way Abdu'l-Baha tries to elevate the conversation, to find that sort of commonality and then bring that to a close. It's not that easy because, as you can see, Hudson Maxim was a man of fixed ideas and very much convinced that rearming was the way to go. Anyway, any volunteers? Yes, Chris, thank you. You could read Abdu'l-Baha, I could read Hudson Maxim.
So you want me to read Abdu'l-Baha said, welcome, welcome, yeah. Very welcome. Hudson Maxim, I am glad to hear you speak English. Abdu'l-Baha said, my life has been spent in the Orient where foreign languages are seldom used. Otherwise, I would have acquired English. Language is the great barrier between nations. When thoughts are interchanged, destinies become one. All languages are difficult of acquirement, for the real language is deeper than the outer words. Maxim said, are you speaking in Turkish? Abdu'l-Baha said, in Persian. I also speak Turkish and Arabic. Turkish is very difficult. In the East, it is thought that acquiring Turkish is equivalent to the study of 3 other tongues. Hudson Maxim said, I understand you are a messenger of peace to this country. What is your opinion about modern war? Shall the great nations maintain armament and defenses as a guarantee or warrant against war? Presenting papers. Here is an article I have written upon this subject. Shall the nations have an international police navy which protects and ensures peace in the world, or shall they disarm and have no navies? I apologize, my lorikeet is getting upset. You can probably hear her. Abdu'l-Baha said, everything that prevents war is good. Hudson Maxim said, Christ said he came to make war. Caesar was great in history because he was great in battle and military skill. Abdu'l-Baha said, we have the history of the world for nearly 6,000 years. Before that, there is no record. During these 6,000 years, there has been constant war, strife, bloodshed. We can see at a glance the results, achievements, and outcomes of war. The history of warfare and strife is known, the effect apparent. Have we not a sufficient standard of experience in this direction? Let us now try peace for a while. If good results follow, let us adhere to it. If not, let us throw it away and light again. Oh, sorry. I lost it. If not, let us throw it away and light again. Nothing will be lost by the experiment.
If you don't mind, I'm going to read Hudson and then you read Abdu'l-Baha, just to help with the flow. Hudson Maxim, evolution has now reached a period in the life of nations where commerce takes the place of warfare. Business is war, cruel, merciless.
Abdu'l-Baha said, true, war is not limited to one cause. There are many kinds of war and conflict going on. Political war, commercial war, patriotic and racial war. This is the very civilization of war.
Do you consider the next great national war necessary?
Abdu'l-Baha said, I hope your efforts may be able to prevent it. Why not try peace for a while? If we find war is better, it will not be difficult to fight again. But if we find that peace is the glorification of humanity, the impulse of true civilization, the stimulus to inventive genius and the means of attainment to the good pleasure of God, we must agree to adhere to it and establish it permanently.
There is much newspaper talk about the United States fighting Japan. There is no prospect of it whatever. We don't want to kill good customers. Commercial energy is more profitable to us. Competition of commerce is as severe, trying, and as cruel as wars of olden time. Science has made war expensive, so expensive it don't pay to fight. We make more money by being peaceful, so long as the other fellow keeps quiet and sticks to business. If an English Navy came over here and bombarded New York a week, they would injure themselves more than us. The expense of ammunition and equipment would cost a great deal more than the damage inflicted by their guns and shells. You're right in advocating peace. I am an advocate of peace from another standpoint. I would make war so expensive that the nations could not afford to fight and therefore would agree to maintain peace.
Abdu'l-Baha said, the product of human invention, genius, and the outcome of human disposition to kill and fight have well nigh reached their limit. It seems as if the art of war could not be carried further. In ancient times, when a nation fought against nation, probably 1,000 would be killed in battle. The expense would not be great, the outcome of victory decisive and final. But in modern times, the science of war has reached such a stage of perfection that in 24 hours, 100,000 could be sacrificed, great navies sent to the bottom of the sea, great cities destroyed in a few hours. The possibilities are incalculable, inconceivable, the after effects even more dreadful than the initial shock. In Egypt, the fellahin who till the Nile banks gather 4 or 5 harvests from the soil. Suppose they are called away from their peaceful pursuits, take tip arms, expend their possessions for powder, and go to war. The first consequences are grievous enough, but the after results are even more deplorable. The country suffers beyond all power of estimation. Agriculture is crippled, abandoned. Sustenance fails. Poverty and suffering continue long afterwards. Furthermore, how many wars have there been in the Orient during past centuries? War and peace in constant succession. But your country, America, remained unaffected by them or their consequences. The news of war might reach Europe and America long after it had happened. But all this is changed in the present century. As soon as war is declared in any part of the world, all human attention is directed toward it. Commerce and the machinery of nations are paralyzed, the whole world thrown into a condition of grave uncertainty. Therefore, it is evident that the time has come to end war and establish peace. This is an exigency and requirement of the present century.
That's a maxim. Fewer are killed in modern engagements than in the battles of ancient times. The range is longer and the action less deadly.
Abdu'l-Baha said, how about the war between Japan and Russia?
That's a maxim. Less men are killed in war in a year now than are killed by our industries through preventable accidents.
Abdu'l-Baha said, war is the most preventable accident.
That's a maxim. The short sword was more deadly in battle than the quick-firing gun, for the reason that massed men come together in hand-to-hand conflict, and the slaughter was fearful. At Magdan, 250,000 soldiers retreated without loss. In ancient times, many thousands would have been overtaken and killed. War is no more dangerous now than automobiling.
Abdu'l-Baha said, history shows that in war between the Roman and Persian empires, extending over a period of 20 years, in which 100,000 men were engaged upon each side, only 5,000 or 6,000 were killed. In modern warfare, there are bombs which kill men like stripping leaves from a tree. An Egyptian general who had served in war against England was accused of cowardice at a meeting in Syria. He asked those present, have you ever seen an English shell? When you see one explode among troops, you will be excused for defeat and cowardice.
That's a maxim. Making a diagram. The effect of a bomb is not so great as expected. Most of its force is expended upward into the air. It is impossible to mass men close enough to it for a full utilization of its energy. If its explosive energy could be expended in the right direction, it would do plenty of killing.
Abdu'l-Baha said, the greatest intelligence of man is being expended in the direction of killing his fellow man. The discovery of high explosives, perfecting of death, dealing weapons of war, the science of military attack. All this is a wonderful manifestation of human intelligence, but it is the wrong direction. You are a celebrated inventor and scientific expert, whose energies and faculties are employed in the production of means for human destruction. Your name has become famous in the science of war. Now you have the opportunity of becoming doubly famous. You must practice the science of peace. You must expend your energies and intelligence in a contrary direction. You must discover the means of peace, invent guns of love, which shall shake the foundations of humanity. The guns you are now building cause the death of man. You must build guns which will be the cause of life to humanity. Henceforth, your life and energy should be given to this blessed purpose. You must work and experiment along this line. This work and accomplishment will be more wonderful than all you have done heretofore. Then it will be said by the people of the world, this is Mr. Maxim, inventor of the guns of war, discoverer of high explosives, military scientist, who has also discovered and invented means of increasing the life and love of man, who has put an end to the strife of nations and uprooted the tree of war. This will be the most wonderful accomplishment of any human being. Your name will glow with mention throughout the history of ages and ages. Then will your life become pregnant and productive with really great results. Consider this. The inventor of high explosives has discovered the means of universal peace. An active worker in the science of war has become a factor in the assembly of love. Then will your name be recorded in the pages of history with a pen of gold. No man in history will equal you in fame and greatness. You will be doubly renowned. God will be pleased with you, and from every standpoint of estimation, you will be a perfect man. Star of the West, Volume 3, Number 7, page 11.
Well, I think there is much food for thought in that particular encounter of Abdu'l-Baha with the great inventor of explosives. You can take it as representative of the encounter of the East and the West in more ways than one. You can also see how well reflected is the spirit of the time, the energy, the inventiveness, and at the same time how deluded Hudson Maxim could be in his way of reasoning. But basic facts that any historian would go back and say, well, how come? And these were the influential people at the time. And this is just but one tiny example. On that very day, as far as I recall, Abdu'l-Baha was also given important speeches and personal interviews, with a few other people like the president of the New York Peace Society, etc. So anyway, I think the point is made there. There are a few quotations that deserve to be really inscribed in buildings. Maybe in future we will see that. Important point to see here is with what amount of patience Abdu'l-Baha listens and provides an answer that is in keeping with logic. And it is only at the very end where there is almost no purpose in continuing with this kind of dialogue that Abdu'l-Baha finally invites actually Hudson Maxim to have a change of heart and see the reality from that different, higher standpoint. Obviously he didn't, but it doesn't mean that he wasn't affected by it. And at any rate, we have this incredible testimony, verbatim, taken by the people who were present. And let's not forget that this was in translation. He was speaking not in Turkish, in Persian, and then translated into English, etc. So what an incredible exchange of views. I would invite everyone to reread this and see it in the light of what for Abdu'l-Baha was a daily experience. He didn't have to prepare for this, unlike myself with this presentation. It was all part of his own inexhaustible resourcefulness. So we are the better for that. We can now enjoy learning from these kind of engagements and seeing what Baha'i discourse, Baha'i scholarship and engagement with the world could look like. Also, we can see that there is a consistency all throughout decades in the work of Abdu'l-Baha. What we see here is no different, actually, in principle from what he was already penning some 35 or 40 years before, and the purpose was exactly the same. So that kind of coherence is again another part of the incredible legacy of Abdu'l-Baha. And it is not in vain that he was called the mystery of God. So I will leave you with those thoughts, and I'm very thankful for your patience. Sorry, my voice wasn't that great, but anyway, thank you so much. I will stop sharing if you don't mind.
Miguel, thank you so much. And if everybody could show their appreciation for this wonderful presentation. You can
Thank
see
you. Beautiful. Thank you.
you've introduced so much new material for many of us. Miguel, I wonder if we just, sorry, I'll put my camera on here. There we are. We'll just stay a few more minutes and see if there's any questions that people have for Miguel before we end the presentation. Who is anybody? Would you got a question for Miguel? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Miguel. I very much enjoyed the preparation and detail you took in presenting that material to us. There was one comment you made very early in your presentation, Miguel. You said that this is written to Iran and to Persians, but you said that it has a wider cast, that it applies to, you know, many other countries. But he was very specific in his instructions and in his characterization of Persians. Could you just elaborate how you think that that has a broader audience?
Well, I think it applies, first of all, because we learned from Shoghi Effendi that was the case. And by that I mean that sometimes it is only later that we learn to see and appreciate something in the faith, but it is only because a new angle has been given to us by the interpreter, in this case, Shoghi Effendi, and it is not the only instance of something like the very expression New World Order, as we know, was mind-boggling to many people who simply thought that the New World Order was a reference to the science of rhetorics and the way things were being expressed in the Bayan and in the writings of Baha'u'llah. And it took Shoghi Effendi to actually tell us that, no, this is not such a reference. It is a reference to something that it is truly a new world order. And in the same way, I think we have been learning to see the reality of the institutions of the faith, the significance of the history of the faith, and this new light. So it is now for us to probably think of ways in which actually the book indeed speaks far more and beyond its immediate audience. And the way of doing that would be a little bit similar maybe to what I was trying to do with this snapshot of a conversation between Hudson Maxim and Abdu'l-Baha, because it is not just an example of just one social intercourse between a prophet from the East and then so-called prophet from the East and then a representative person of the West. It is far more than that. It is an exchange about how you actually, well, the way I read it, about how you approach a difficult subject and topic to a person who is fully convinced that war is a means of civilizing humanity. Whereas Abdu'l-Baha is telling you something as basic, no, it is the destroyer of the very foundations of humanity. And that's why I was emphasizing a little bit the importance of that quote about unlearning the sciences of war and learning the arts of peace, because this change of heart is something that takes quite a bit. And unless we do that, it's difficult not to see confirmations of your own thinking. In international relations, the realistic paradigm is something that it is almost uncontested in terms of how we analyze and perceive. Even sometimes in normal conversations, we see applications of this when we talk about the national interest and how sacrosanct the national interest is, etc., etc. So if we work from that kind of premises, we are blinding ourselves to seeing things from these other perspectives. I'm not saying that there are only one perspective in international relations, etc. I'm simply saying that we are so accustomed, so used to use these kind of premises and critically without actually contesting them, then we go from there. But the problem about going from there is that you have to be consistent with the consequences and repercussions that this has. I think what you see in The Secret of Divine Civilization is a very consistent way of talking about the importance of realizing the important fundamental forces that animate society. One of them, identified by Abdu'l-Baha in the book, is the very source of the manifestations of God, the prophets from God. They are the revealers of the word, the will of God, and whenever they do that, well, they bring about further changes, make possible further changes in society. We are so accustomed to see that as a sort of impossibility that we don't think much of that. But I think books like The Secret of Divine Civilization, any of the engagements of Abdu'l-Baha, allow us to actually see reality from that perspective. Sorry for taking that much.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I shouldn't have turned on that microphone. Thank you for that question and answer. We're coming close to the end, but I see someone's got their hand up there. Is that right? One question? I'm not sure.
Yes.
It's I am.
Hello, Apa. Hello, Apa. I didn't know how to change my name on my phone, but I'm Maria Williams from the Warringah Baha'i community. Hi.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask if Dr. Miguel wouldn't mind sharing that last document that you read, just so I could study it a little bit more.
Yeah, no problem.
If he has yeah, thank you. That was very beautiful. Thank you.
I will do that immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then one last question there before we come to an end. This is the last meeting of our study group here on the Gold Coast, and we're about to have dinner together. So we hope you're having a nice meal as well. And but we've got time for one last question. But remember, we're very hungry up here, so make it a short question. Any last questions? Any last comments for Miguel? I can't see any. There's a big chance, even just to say hello and before we finish.
I want to say hello.
All right.
Hi, William.
Farhan's coming in to say hello.
Farhan.
Hey, man, my old flatmate in the ISGP. How are you?
It's been a long time.
See you, man.
Yes. Well, what I was going to do before we finish, I'm just going to bring the camera around for everybody who's in our study group to sign off and say hello and wave. I'm coming to you, Sally, because you're on. And just pass it around and say goodbye to everybody. Say hello. No, you're on.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Miguel. I came in a little late, but thank you. What I was able to get was invaluable. Lots of love.
This could be a long night if we're all going to introduce ourselves, but I guess we'll claim special privilege here. Thanks, Graham and Farhan has carried us through the year, and thank you, Dr. Gil, for giving us a fine finale.
Hi, Miguel. Hi, everyone. It was nice to see you. Thanks again for Miguel. Enjoyed it very much and learned a lot. And here's Michael.
Hello, I'm Michael Day. Thanks very much, Miguel. Great talk.
Hello, this is Jan Flower. Thank you so much. I feel very blessed with all these wonderfully knowledgeable people. And I have learned such a lot during this year as well as tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miguel, for being there for us and presenting to our group and to these other friends that were able to join us this afternoon. I guess the initial impetus for this came from that message of the House of Justice on the Day of Covenant last year, and you know, the profound reflection of this year and reflecting on the center of the covenant, Abdu'l-Baha. I think going forward to the coming 9-year plan, I'm very excited about what little gems of wisdom that this still will hold for us going forward in our engagements with the wider public and our approaches towards world peace and all of those wonderful things. So thanks for renewing my interest and in this text. Thank you.
All right, so there you have it. Thanks very much, Miguel. I hope you heard all that as we went around the room.
I did.
Good, good. So thank you all, friends, for joining us. We hope to be in touch with you again. And once again, thanks to Miguel and Elham, of course, for being such a fine couple in partnership in all those endeavors. We look forward to doing this again sometime. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Graham and Miguel. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Enjoy your dinner.
Thank you.
I will be sending the